Yes, I think that, so yes, Derek, welcome. And Jim asked how many tech writers we have on the team, and Gareth and I were like, zero, we have zero. But then we have, a bunch of people with passion for it. And of course we would like to see more community involvement too. We had some tech writers that were part of the SaltStack company. And then as we transitioned over, they became part of the larger VMware technical writing group, and they're not dedicated to the project. So we're trying to get some. I don't know how that works at VMware. So it's a new thing.
Okay, was that Alyssa's story? She got called back to the mothership, or does it work?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's say as a developer getting into tech writing, yeah, I'm really having fun and getting into the this whole user guide thing, and yeah, so I'm happy to start just jumping in, and it's hard to get a hold of people. I don't know, everyone's like really busy, so.
That's true. This is a good place to get in touch with people, and I guess the Slack channel.
Right.
That's probably the best. I didn't realize that some of the working groups we actually made public Google groups for. So like a mailing list. And we could do that for docs. I wasn't aware that we had those. So that's something new that I just realized some of the groups that have been going on since before I was part of the team have. And I was like, oh, well, I guess we can put this together. Public Google groups that would be a mailing list. Anyway, I don't mean to take over, Derek. Go ahead.
I didn't know. I also didn't know about the mailing list either. So interesting. I just put in the chat to a link to the agenda just for today, the kind of stuff that we could talk about if we want to go into it. And that, yeah, so with Jim's question about the tech writing thing, yeah, I think we need VM. It's interesting since acquisition. Yeah, like Sage said, we had, so originally there were 3 tech writers at SaltStack. Most of us, though, I'd say a majority of our time, if not 100% of our time, was pretty much SaltStack Enterprise. Is that, and so then when the acquisition happened, one of the tech writers was let go, and then Elisa ended up going to be 100% dedicated to enterprise. And I kind of, for like the first time, really got to start digging into the open docs. And I'm more of a tooling background. And so I'm all about the pipelines, the themes, the Sphinx stuff, the contributing workflow, all of that. And it was a lot of digging into what could I highly prioritize, or what were the most important things in Salt Docs when I was looking at them initially. And a big piece of our initial push was the contributing guide docs. And so Wayne did a lot of work there. We had back and forths with other core engineers too. Pedro did a lot of testing documentation too. We also had so much stuff going on that was acquisition related. So tons of things happened related to like rebranding, changing of social media accounts. And then I really ended up, a large percentage of my time still then was with enterprise related docs and working with Elisa on what the story is due to the acquisition, where that stuff's all going. So with all that happening, I'm also kind of transitioning into more of a SRE type role. And instead of being a dedicated technical writer, and because we've never had a 100% dedicated just technical writer to open, we're trying to see how we can figure that out with VMware's org structure and if we can reflect the way that other open source projects do it, that VMware works with, because we have a lot of Kubernetes and other open source teams that VMware dedicates resources to, including tech writers that get embedded in the teams. And that would be the most ideal situation for us if we could figure that out. So yeah, that's kind of like where that is. As a result, it's all been like when people can go, oh man, I need to get this documented if I can, or how can I improve the docs? And one of the biggest problems is that because SALT can be used for everything, it means subject matter expertise is maybe hard to come by when it goes to how do I even improve this doc? Well, you might need to go talk to this one very specific person in the community who uses that tool and knows how it works. And as a result, knows how it should be better documented. And so it can be really difficult on the SALT side. That's why the SALT user guide is an excellent starting place that you've been working on, Jim, because Alan Kugler did all this work into getting it done and already passed it through a lot of subject matter experts to go, is this right? Is this good? Is this as it should be? And so each of those got the subject matter expert reviews, but it didn't then have the style guide, technical writing kind of post review that would happen now that we have the knowledge there in place.
Okay, that was all the original Word documents, or the Google Docs are up there. Okay, I was wondering how those, how those came to be.
Yep, that's exactly how that happened. Is that there was, before the acquisition, it was initially going to be associated with paid SALT Open training. But then when the acquisition happened, several people, Elisa probably was the biggest, Elisa and Alan were like, Emmy, we're like, we need to open source these things. They're related to open. We don't know what's going to necessarily happen to training or how long it's going to take to evolve training. And we'd rather this was freely available because the docs need good material. Okay. And so then, so it went from, okay, let's get these docs sitting in Google Drive, converted to RST and into Sphinx, because of the long-term goal of unifying the docs with the rest of the docs pipeline. That's all Sphinx based. Okay. So that's why you see it isolated, but using Sphinx, because of how we're wanting to merge the docs, at least the way they get published. So it would stay in its own repo as SALT user guide. We also have a new guide that's being built, the SALT install guide, that's going to be reflecting a lot of the same standards coming out of the SALT user guide. And those pieces are what are eventually, when they get published, will be on like docs.saltproject.io something. And so that's kind of the vision and where we're going. And where when I initially was thinking about what A/B testing would look like is going, well, we don't really know what the users want or really truly consider a much better experience. And we know it's a better experience for us as individuals. I know it's better for me. And but I really want to make sure, like, okay, if we have any GitLab pages, can we get like a cool GitLab pages endpoint that says, hey, here's where all the docs are, using the new theming, using the new everything. And can people try it out and say if it's better, if it's weirdly missing a feature that they really love, if, that kind of thing. And that's part of this meeting is I'm actually going to be delaying my initial A/B testing plan, because the goal was to use this month to focus on the retheming and the layout of the SALT modules references that are pulled from the doc strings from SALT repo and merged with the SALT user guide into like a nice interface that people then can go and search against and look at and use new drop-down menus with right and left-hand navs, all the whole works. I need to delay that because I'm being redirected when it comes to my current priorities task-wise. So that doesn't necessarily mean there's a degraded performance in things we have available, because it doesn't change what's available. And what you're doing, Jim, is still very much accepted and wanted. when it
Okay,
comes
great.
to when it comes to the technical writer review of those docs in SALT user guide. Because at some point, what I'm going to want to do is talk to you about your experience in reviewing these chapters and what ultimately you found to be the most common things you had to fix.
Okay.
And the most common things to fix that you can imagine being automated. Because if it's like, oh, the way they were capitalizing Saltmaster or something, or the way
Okay.
they were doing certain RST formats that I needed to convert over based on our style guide, because I really want to make sure that the things you ran into, that if you're like, if a thing could have gone through, it could have fixed X, Y, and Z.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. Because if I get that into there, that means Salt install guide, the new repo we're working on, will then be able to adopt these type of fixes. And in the future, we could even see about how easy it could be to try to adopt them to the Salt docs that exist right now. Because I think it would be beneficial to open source the style guide automation of these kind of things if people would see them as useful. Because we're going to run into this problem with our distributed doc sets, is we have all of these item and pop projects, for example, that are all going to have isolated docs to the repo, because this is a docs as code problem. It's a gift and a curse, is that you've bundled the docs with the module. But if you if everything is distributed and isolated, that means it's harder to unify tooling across them all. And standards, and so pretty much what we learn, I want to eventually probably make a dedicated repo that compounds all our tooling, so that any other repository can, in theory, import it and say, take the latest and greatest and run it, and just see if I run into errors or what I see.
Okay, yeah, fascinated by all the automation stuff. No, you're an astronaut. You want all the lights to turn green for you light the candles. So
Yeah.
no, I'm interested in that too.
Cool.
Since your
cool.
since your username is literally script automate, since like that's your tag too.
Exactly.
Okay, I don't want to hijack the meeting, but yeah, this is really great. I'm on board.
No, that you're not hijacking anything. This is why we got the working group. So
okay, so I'll just keep doing what I'm doing, and
yeah, keep doing what you're doing. And I know that Elisa every now and then has been having some open windows to look at stuff you're doing, because there are some things she's recently had to like wait on other teams internally to do.
Sure.
And so then she's kind of just dropped by. Otherwise, if you submit a PR or have a question and you see it not get answered for like a few days or something, hit me up on the SaltStack community chat, just to be like, that one that you have going on with me and Elisa right now.
Yeah.
And just see like, hey, I don't know if you saw, because sometimes this is a distributed problem again, and something that Sage actually has been looking into is we have repos on two different platforms, on GitHub and on GitLab.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of repos on GitLab especially. And so if you might open an issue or PR here, but it's kind of drowned in the noise of everything else, or the other projects maybe we're working on. And yours specifically in Salt User Guide does kind of just require someone who's familiar with that repo, which is either me or Elisa, or maybe someone else who's most aware of that stuff. So yeah, anyway, thanks again for the work that you're doing on that. And I'm glad that you're learning a lot about stuff as you're doing it. So
yeah, great.
Awesome.
Well, one more thing.
Yeah,
it's like this is a really, really new project, right? I'm doing like MR number 30. And
yeah.
How big are you expecting to get, just to kind of take over, most of the existing documentation? Or
yeah, well, it's going to see, I don't really know the size, because it's going to require an audit of the Salt docs, and there's a subset of the Salt docs that don't need to exist in the Salt repo. But there are a lot of salt docks that do need to stay there. And so it's like, it's gonna require going, and we also don't know which ones that the salt user guide is effectively deprecating
Right.
and replacing. Yeah, and not only that, but the salt install guide repo, that's going to be a lot like how the salt user guide repo is, but for the install doc specifically, that even deprecates more of what's in salt, in addition to deprecating what's on repo.saltproject.io, a separate doc site that's built with a separate doc set. So there's a lot of moving pieces. It's definitely going to keep growing, and because we want to be able to do things like add tutorials. We want to be able to do things like add extensive examples. I don't know, add additional testing to the examples, all sorts of things as a long term. So it's going to be a continuously growing, because right now it's, what would you call it? Right now it's the minimal viable docs, and it's going to be iterative growth. So. And this is why that automation is really key and important, because in all future growth then can be impacted by whatever automation we come up with.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, it's good to hear. Yeah, I'm in.
Yeah. The stuff that you're working on is effectively gonna have, it's gonna be seen for the future quite a lot.
Okay,
Cool.
It'll be my legacy.
Yes, there you go. Your open source legacy.
Okay, thanks. I'm done.
Yeah, cool. All right, so what do I got here? Docs clinic next week. Oh yeah, I can't add. So here's the interesting thing: Twitch calendars. Someone pointed out, Derek, the docs clinics aren't on the Twitch calendar. Turns out the Twitch calendar is really, really limited, and you can only add daily or weekly schedule items on the calendar. So if you do anything that's like every other week or greater, Twitch can't put it on a calendar. So as a result, it's kind of like that. Either we just go, okay, or someone at the beginning of the week does the annoying task of scheduling one that's just that week every week. And so I've just opted to not. And to just, we tell people at the open hour, we have it on our events calendar, and I say it in our Slack.
Okay, well, I've been going off the, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Do we have somebody who can do, like, I don't even think I have access to do that in Twitch.
I know I can. If I know that I can, probably Tyler and Wayne, maybe.
Probably Tyler and Wayne and you. Okay.
Yeah.
That's fine. And I think that's okay. We could put on something weekly that I don't know, we go change, I guess. I'm not sure. That's interesting. I would like to look into that again, because it seems like we could manually do it, or we could probably fudge it.
Yeah, and that's the part I wasn't sure how to do or what to do, So yeah, because if it's weekly, can you just go in and cancel that week, or does the Twitch calendar not even allow that? What's
right,
how to work? So,
or could we
really
put on there, we're not streaming this to Twitch, but come to the Docs working group?
Yeah,
I don't know.
come to Docs working group instead. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. Just thinking, Yeah, I actually will see if I can find out.
Cool.
Okay.
Thank you. And Sage, if you want to do any follow up with me on it to see stuff, we can. Tyler might be the one with the most permissions on who can grant people to look at or do certain things, because I'm not fully sure how I even got that. So yeah. Oh yeah, and the Twitch URL has changed, so I'm updating that in our agenda meeting notes. Is that it used to be SaltStack Inc. on Twitch TV, but now it's Twitch TV Salt Project OSS as an open source software. Oh yeah, so this week we had an interesting fun event where the documentation pipeline kind of got really out of shape. And so I had to spend a lot of digging time figuring out what happened. And so everything in the master branch, a ton of doc strings and modules were just not documented. And it was only in the master branch. And so I have the issue in the agenda, which really I cataloged as I was, here's the issue. I cataloged as I was walking through it all the problems I was seeing. I resolved the issue and I opened up another PR, but it required like 2 PRs in the build docs repo, one a follow-up PR that we now have in the SALT repo, and some future issues associated with I'm going to post it in the documentation channel. And so that thing pretty much has a, hey, it's me going, oh, I see this. I think this is the problem. Okay, I think I found out. Here are the things that solved it. Fun stuff. The ultimate end goal is that we need to get the build docs pipeline included in our GitHub SALT repos test automation pipeline, so that, and GitHub Actions is capable of it. So you can pull a GitLab stored container image that's been generated in a repo. If it's open and public, you don't even need the auth for it, I believe. And so then you can pull that down, use the build docs container to try to build the docs and see if it fails. That way we don't know about something later in the pipeline. That's going to have some more testing needed, because I don't know whether Nox is our testing tooling, which has allowed for easier use of going, here's the Nox command, generate the docs for me. And it abstracts away needing to know the make commands and needing to get the Sphinx prereqs and all that stuff, because Nox handles virtual environments. Build docs currently doesn't use it. And that's the main problem, is build docs uses different commands from SALT repo to generate the docs. So there's a disconnect there. Okay. Dependency tree complexity. Yeah, we ran into issues. You know, I'll share my screen too. I'm not just talking. I can show you blobs of text. So and by the way, I'm just looking at the agenda link that I have, that I posted in the chat. That's in the Docs Hub, is that open PR. So we have a dependency tree complexity in the SALT repo. That was part of the problem in troubleshooting it. And that's because SALT does a very unique way of dependency management, because we have to handle dependencies for CI pipeline. We have to handle dependencies for packaging. We have to handle dependencies for docs pipelines. And these are all these dependencies are used at different times by different tools and different environments. And I mean, we have requirements files for different operating systems and that kind of thing. So that made it hard to troubleshoot how to even deal with dependency conflicts that may exist across these different dependency trees, and also even how to simply just update how we use Sphinx and its dependency tree. I talked to Pedro about this a little bit, and Pedro said that hopefully he thinks that something like Poetry can resolve this problem that we have with SALT, but that he hasn't really had enough time to dig into how Poetry could work and its implementation of it. And Poetry is probably what I'd like to use for new item and pop projects. And I need to talk to Tyler about that, because we're creating templates and Bootstrap tools. And this may be something, Gareth, that you may have some insight into. I don't know how SALT extensions work for, it sounds like it's just, since SALT extensions this is supposed to be like a regular Python package, that you don't have to do the lengthy dependency tree. Are people just having a requirements file, or are you thinking of people using something like Poetry, or do you kind of know what Pedro's thoughts are, or your thoughts are on that?
No, I don't think we've thought that far out yet. I mean, so Pedro created a really simple tool. He mentioned it in one of our internal meetings this morning. That just kind of creates the basic layouts. And I think it creates a basic requirements file that you can go in later and edit. Refresh my memory. What is poetry? What does it do?
Poetry is a dependency, is like a so you know how pipenv works?
Yeah.
It's sort of like a different form of that helps with dependency management, but you can work with different dependency trees based on environments. And it could also spin up virtual environments on demand. And it will also then check through your trees for the dependency conflicts, where it would then try to do its best to figure out what can fulfill the requirements across your entire dependency tree when it comes to sub-dependencies. And it did it in a way that was better than pip, but I know that pip, as of recently, has added improvements to its dependency tree. Its dependency, what would you call that? Resolution. And
Yeah.
so, but yeah, and so I didn't know if I did it because the problem is the salt extension could potentially have the same problem if you say, okay, I need to create a dependency tree for Python 3.6, 3.7, 3.8, 3.9 through 10, and I need to make sure certain tests are happening and being done. I don't know how our testing pipeline works or how testing pipelines would work for a salt extension, and how we try to create the best, most optimal experience for people creating new extensions and for us trying to manage the future of split out extensions.
Right. Yeah. No, that's definitely something we should talk about, because as you were talking, I could see like a really huge, colossal mess regarding people's requirements files in their own extensions.
Yeah,
All sorts of havoc.
yeah, because if, let's say, you bring in a salt extension and it has a dependency tree conflict with something else in salt, what
Right.
happens? Like, I don't really know what happens.
Yeah. I don't think we're running them in any sort of like virtual environments or anything like that. It's just you install it and it gets installed, and like whatever requirements you install also would get installed as well.
Yeah, because it'd be interesting to see if, like, would the approach to that be to create isolated either virtual M's like you were alluding to, or something else that would ensure that if someone imported a salt extension, it wouldn't override packages used by core salt, or how, you know, it's an interesting problem to think about, especially in the future with Tiamat, because
Yeah.
Tiamat's going to package up all the dependencies and send them with it to people's, and that adds the extra layer of needing to have proper dependency tree CVE vulnerability scanning to ensure that we're not pushing other CVE impacted Python packages to people's systems.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing too. Like we kind of started a little bit earlier of like when stuff gets broken out into salt extensions, what we package, like what gets packaged as part of salt, what do we consider stuff that we want to include in releases, and then we have to kind of like police those requirements files to make sure that they're not screwing something up. So yeah, there's a lot to work out that we haven't worked out.
Got it.
And something with the salt extensions, we haven't figured out a lot of stuff, obviously, but pertaining to docs is I'd like to give like what we're doing with salt extensions to kind of say, here's kind of how we think you should set up your repo. And here's kind of like a baseline of testing and and some things there. I'd also like to give them some like baseline documentation, like here's a README file that you fill out, like a template, make sure that you have a license, and some of those things. But then also like just the documentation that goes with it, with that module. And each one of those is going to be really different, but I'd love to give them like maybe even a theme, especially if they stay with part of, like the SALT stack org, and they're part of, the SALT project still. But even if they're not, I'd love to give them something that they could use and say, well, this is kind of what we suggest. And probably base it on a lot of the work that's going on with the install and the user guide as a baseline for right now.
Yeah, yeah. That I've been thinking about the same thing, especially
Mhm.
after Pedro recently showed me some docs associated with SALT pie test factories or test factories or something like that. And
The PyTest salt factories.
yeah.
They have a
And
funny name.
yeah, I know, I
PyTest
mixed
salt
all
factories.
up the whole order. Yeah.
That's okay. I had to think about it after you said it because I was like, that's close. Wait a minute.
That's like I
PyTest
had
salt
the right
factories.
words.
It's
Just not the right order. Yeah.
whatever order.
Yeah, because right now I'm working with Tyler to ensure that all new, because so on that side of the fence, they're using pop create and pop create item, which adds some extra complexity even to your bootstrapping of new projects. And I want to make sure that they're following their documentation. Bootstrapping of Sphinx projects follows and adopts lessons learned that we have in docs tooling in general and management, so that new projects are as push button as possible and are as much, I don't have to think about this as possible. And like, for example, I want to get the Firo theme into place, but we're still using the SALT material theme, which the SALT material theme, depending on how you configure it, will use the old logos and use other stuff that of SALT stack. And it's also, we have it under our org, but really it's an unsupported theme because it requires front end dev work that we're just not able to give to it. And
Yes.
yeah, and so as a result, there is a different theme. Firo, it's addressed pretty much all of our problems that we need to resolve in the material theme.
Mhm.
And it's used by pip, it's used by pip, URL lib3, really massively popular Python libraries, and the people contributing to Firo are even associated with those projects, and are even like Python Software Foundation fellows. So they are like the people to go, okay, we want to use their theme because we know from a long-term perspective, there's a much higher likelihood of continued support and development. And they've also made it incredibly modular to be, because they had the problem with all these other themes, just like the one you're using now, is they don't make it easy to expand the theme.
Mm.
While Firo has taken a lot of measures to go, here's the least amount of work for you to take to expand and add features to this. And that's what all the reasons that I want to adopt it. And so I think if I get it on a baseline going, let's have Firo in
Mhm.
all of our docs tooling going forward, by default, that's just going to be, it's just going to be better.
What's the theme that we're using for the user guide?
The
And
theme that we're
install
using,
guide is
that's the Sphinx material theme that we currently, it's a
Gotcha.
forked, yeah. And the history behind that is that when SaltStack Enterprise docs were happening, we had an old Jekyll theme we were on that was just one gigantic page. It was really messy.
so the Jekyll theme was actually new
Oh, wow.
if you're
Okay.
me, because
Oh, yeah.
the one we were on before was ancient.
Yeah.
And we went to Jekyll in the time that I've been with the company, so in the last 3 years. And that was a decision that Ashley and then a tech writer who hasn't been with the company in a long, long time, wanted to go to because they were familiar with it.
I see.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. we ended up using the Sphinx material theme, a fork of it, because the idea was, how do we ensure that if we want to have a unified theme across all of our doc sets, but we also want it to import and use the logos from one single source. And that way the theme isn't stored in the repo itself, because that's what SaltStack's currently doing in Salt's repo. And when I mean Salt project, I keep thinking of the org, SaltStack's Salt. But the Salt repo has a local theme, a local custom theme in the repository. And not just one, but it has 2 local themes that slightly differ because of the way Debian packages our documentation. So we can't actually remove it. But if we went with a third-party theme that doesn't have all the problems our current theme does, that by default doesn't add Google-related code and stuff to it, Debian could actually then make use of that theme, and we could deprecate both themes from the Salt repo. And then we could ensure that all other repositories that spin up their own projects can use the Firo theme. And that includes that if they're not underneath the Salt project / SaltStack orgs on GitHub or GitLab, if someone's making their own isolated project, they're not accidentally spinning up with a SaltStack branded theme. They're able to use an open source Firo theme not associated with us managing it. That's purely their own, that they could do whatever they want with past our baselines or even override our baselines. And I like that idea more too, because then we're not in the business of going, let's fork a theme and try to maintain it, and oh crap, we can't, which is what happened. So, and it's what currently Salt's doing itself with its own theme that people don't like. And yeah, so that's a fun history there, and why I want Firo to be a baseline and everything due to the direction and support and features that it adds and addresses, especially because it's good mobile view. It has expandable navs and
That's
everything else.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should think about that as we start thinking about having more docs jams and stuff too, because as we finish up the work on the user guide and we start working on the install guide, it would probably, if we're going to change themes across the board and change those as well, we probably want to think about a timeline to do those two, as well as like other things, or if we wanted to start using that theme with a specific project in mind that would be separate, like maybe that's Salt extensions, or maybe it's something else, that would be fine. But I don't think that that's going to fit into like the current release process necessarily. Not that it has to be, but just that I don't know that it would fit in that tight of a timeline. But maybe towards the end of this release cycle, so sort of the end of June timeframe, or sort of just June timeframe, we could start thinking about, if we had a timeline in place and we could kind of say, well, we think it's going to take us about this much time to do this piece of work. Maybe we could start on some of those pieces, or maybe we could even set a time for a docs jam to do some of those things.
Yeah, no, yeah, because what we do want to require is pretty much, and this is what's been great about Salt User Guide, is starting with Salt User Guide, converting it over to the Firo theme. And then with the Salt install guide, I mean, the Salt install guide's brand new. So I'm going to just bootstrap that straight up with the Firo theme by default. And from there, we get to learn the nuances and potential problems with the theme, or things that we want to improve that allow for us to improve it through its modular approach. So that whatever we learn in the implementation of it in the Salt install guide and in the Salt user guide, we'd be able to bring with us when we end up working on what the Salt docs look like under Firo. And yeah, it's going to be, I had a proof of concept going on where I was actually working on building all the doc strings in Salt, because problems that were pointed out previously were here, I could show it. In a previous working group, we talked about how when people come to SALT, one of the most often things people say that they care about and use is this page. Is they go, I want to go to the module index. I don't even use search because it's been terrible for me. I often don't look at these other docs. They're hard to navigate, or I use a different third-party search to even find out what doc tree I should be in. Because these are all expandable, but you can't tell that they have subpages unless you're at the table of contents. So this page and this page, often people are either control Fing or they're just using a third-party search tool like DuckDuckGo or Google to do. And so what I wanted to do is that since these are broken up by like module type, is that it would be good to have just a landing page that has a summary of what these type of module types are, and that you could look at their index then associated with that tree, and that it could be part of the left-hand nav experience that you could drop down into these. And I thought that would be a way easier user experience, and it was going to be part of the A/B testing plan, where the SALT user guide would exist here at this level, and it's a drop down to get into stuff. And then there'd be this module reference, which it could be a drop down to start to look into things. Yeah, because yeah, so I don't know.
Yeah, and so as we move into the SALT extensions, a lot of these modules are going to come out, and so these docs will come out, and where will they live, and how will they function? Because if they already exist here, so there's some of that stuff where it's like, oh, we're doing something new and it's going to go into SALT extensions. It's not new.
Yeah.
And then there's some stuff that we're pulling out of the code base that we want to put into SALT extensions, and that piece of documentation is also something that I want to kind of think about. And we could do something very simple, like just simply moving it, but I don't know that that makes sense, because we probably want to reference it here.
You'd have to have, what we
Right.
likely would have to do is a dedicated, so since we're SALT user guide and SALT installation guide and stuff, we've been thinking about maybe they need to be their own
Right.
docs page with then they
Mhm.
have their own specific table of contents to them. And I think what we'll probably need to do is have a SALT extensions aggregator type page
Mhm.
where people could come in here to look at the core SALT stuff, but there have to be something at the top to say, are you looking for, if it's not listed.
If you didn't find it here, try SALT
Yeah.
extensions,
Here's-
or something.
here, go
Mhm.
check out the library, the SALT extensions library, because the SALT extensions library is going to, as by default, be ones managed by us, but we may introduce a onboarding process to get community extension docs included in there.
Right.
So that people then can search, I'm trying to see whether SALT can do this thing. And this is the huge problem with item and plugins also, is again the distributed docs problem. And because we don't have a search, we don't have a dedicated plan for how search is going to work. It's going to be
Right.
people pretty much just going to PyPI maybe and looking for what are packages prefixed with something, maybe. I guess.
That was one of the questions that came up recently. I'm trying to remember where it came up. Someone asked if we would, one with maybe it was in the Mac OS working group,
I think it was. Yeah.
where they asked if we would have a similar thing to, I forget what the naming is. I think Chefs was like the
Ansible.
supermarket, and Ansible's was,
Right, how you should
Something
have like a
similar.
gallery of some kind, yeah.
yeah, basically like a way to find, hey, someone wrote a salt extension that does this, or someone moved one out of core and now it's over in this repository. This is how you install it.
Right.
That
A
could be something to
global
think
type
about.
search or something that's top level that could navigate you through some of those things. Well, and
Yeah.
then some of that comes to like, if it's within our open source projects, even if it's, you know, in whatever land it's going to live in, that's a difficult problem. But if it becomes something that's a new org, right, and it's community based, can we even call that salt extension? So there's some things there, and then how do we reference that? And should we? There's some questions. I'm not really sure. Like if it was part of our code base and it came out, we'll probably have to walk through each one of them individually. And I'm sure that some of them are going to be grouped together. But like that Moose FS one that we reference all the time, that we're all like, so we don't know anybody that uses this. And I don't know that it should even live in our org, but I don't know that anybody else is going to tackle that either.
Well, yeah, and you're going to run into an interesting problem where what happens when you start pulling out extensions and then someone upgrades Salt? So someone upgrades Salt to a version that doesn't even have that tool anymore. And so upgrading is now a different story, because their upgrade can't just simply be upgrading. It's got to include some additional step to reintroduce a plugin if they reintroduce an extension if they use it.
I mean, it's at that point we quickly find out what modules people are using and what aren't.
There you go, exactly. And then those people could be potential maintainers.
Right. Well, I mean, so like one of the things that we have wanted to do for a while, and for a variety of reasons, it's gotten shot down, is some sort of like telemetry around usage of modules. So I mean, that there would be the argument of why something like that is needed.
I can already hear Debian screaming.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. I think that there's other ways to do that are less invasive or opt-in, opt-out than sort of a regular, just sort of, we're going to monitor everything that you do. But
Oh yeah. No, I mean, I like honestly, like when we first kind of started discussing it internally, my whole thought process behind it and what I mentioned was like, it would be totally opt-out, or actually opt-in. Like you'd have to opt into it, and the only thing that we would send along somewhere would be, hey, this installation used this module. That's it.
right, and this happens.
That's all we're
this
interested
happens,
in.
Right, this happens in infrastructure all the time. Like you buy something from EMC, which is actually like the Taco Bell of infrastructure, right? They put together this and this and this, and then they call it a thing, right? They call it their EMC server, whatever. And what they do is they say you have to opt in to Phone Home. Same thing. It would do the same thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but no, I totally understand the concerns there. Like anytime you have anything that's, as you
Right.
said, phoning home, like you're concerned about what it's sending. But
Right,
this would be open source, so you could
Right.
look and see exactly what it's sending.
And the problem that I bet Ken Jordan could talk about where it was, you had these air gapped data centers where they couldn't phone home, and they did have something for them to still get support and still contact them and give them logs and things like that. That wasn't just like an FTP server, it was dedicated for them and part of their service agreement and things like that. But we're talking about bare metal there, but we still had something in place for that support model. And so it's like that we've solved this problem. I think that we can do this with what our software does today and have people opt into it and then know what they're opting into and make that available. And I think some people do want that because of what it comes with, that we're like, oh, but we're developing this thing because we know you guys are using it. You didn't have to tell us. We didn't have to survey you. You didn't have to send us an email,
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting because technically we could probably even develop a state sanitizer tool Because if what you're caring about is how they're doing stuff, you could sanitize YAML where you just remove all the args and leave it just as the key values, so that if
Mhm.
you're looking for things like package.install or I don't know, whatever the name of an actual
Download or
particular
something, yeah.
module is, not, you don't want the value, because that's the value to that key is what is private to that company. But if you had
Right.
something that could go through and tally just that key, the key pieces, you technically could then start to get just heavily sanitized numeric values, maybe. I don't know. But then
I think there's ways to do it.
that's incredibly opt-in based though, right? And then
Yes.
that includes tons of conversation, and generally what we get is crickets, and so it's really hard. I mean, Gareth, I've worked at places where they just ended up calling it the screen test. Is they go, well, we're gonna remove this thing. We have no idea who owns it or who uses it, but we'll know once we remove it.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the direction we're going in, like.
And that's the direction we gotta, right?
I mean, we have, not to go on like a soapbox or anything, but we've said we needed this for this purpose for a while,
Yeah.
and we've been told no. So, and but we've been told yes on this direction of breaking things out. So,
Yep.
and we're gonna, as I said, we're gonna find out real quick, like that first release, like when we start pulling stuff out into its own extension, like, hey, wait, I'm using the Moose FS module.
Right.
Oh,
I'll be
well, here's where you go and
interested.
find it.
Yeah, I'll be interested to do this as well. And I think that the first release that we do have salt extensions available, that we've broken stuff out, I hope that we have just a few so we can keep track. I am a little bit concerned that the popularity that we're seeing with just the little bit of talk that we're doing right now, and it's so early stages, that this is going to snowball into something that we can't keep up with, and without like telemetry and documentation and some of these things that are really key to it, and then how we're going to continue to maintain some of this stuff. I'm concerned about the snowball effect a lot. And so whatever it is that we do first, I'm hoping to cap that. And I'm already at a point today that I know which ones I want to cap, because I think I already know 10 that want to come out. And I'm like, so we need to stop right now, because we're going to get to 15 very quickly, and that's going to snowball to 25. And all of a sudden we're not going to be able to keep up.
Yeah.
And so we may have to put a limit on some of that stuff too, but
Well, there's
it's
going to be
interesting to talk about it.
yeah, because there's going to be a lot of the doc story needs to be planned out heavily
Mhm.
with
And so does-
however this ends up going.
Yes. And so does release and maintenance, right? And then how that comes back
Yeah.
in. So there's
right.
there's some things we haven't even talked about that are pretty key to where that is
I mean,
going.
Yeah, you'd have to also
Spice rack. I love it, Gary. We should call it the spice rack.
Oh yeah, there you go. Spice rack for where people search for it. I love that
I
idea.
love it. I love that. It's the spice rack.
The good thing is once you have extensions pulled out, you can at least get a proxy for utilization through download counts, right? You don't necessarily have to put in explicit telemetry.
Yeah, and
That's a
we
good
do
point.
that.
That's
It's
a
just
good
that
point.
we don't, I think that today, the way that we have it set up in CloudFront is that it only gives us a dump of information. Like I can't parse it any further than just sort of like everything. But if we broke out repo
If we broke
into
out
the way-
extensions, yeah.
and we broke out extensions, then we can do some of that, and
Yeah.
we can do it with that in mind.
That's a good point.
Mhm.
And of course it might skew based on test pipelines. Like, wow, that's being used a lot. It's like actually our test pipeline's just downloading maybe packages.
Oh, yeah, I think we can
Um,
actually take that out, because don't we have our tests running in a different, they're running in dev, not prod. Aren't they?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I think this will be cool to see. it's just gonna, yeah, it's gonna get to a point where if we don't have a dedicated tech writer, and if we don't have dedicated resources to the docs problem, it's
Mhm.
then just gonna become a gigantic
will snowball.
problem, and everyone will say, we need to do this. But if resources aren't, if we, especially from VMware's side, are not able to get the resources to it, all we're gonna be doing is digging a technical debt hole. That's gonna get really, really bad for whoever finally can be dedicated to it.
Yeah, it's an interesting problem though, that I think that we could solve with some templating up front too, to say, depending on, so on our experience, as we go through it right now, if you had a module that was in the SALT project and it has documentation with it here, then this is what we recommend that you do. And we kind of lay it out for them. Here's where this lives and here's how we expect you to maintain it. If it's going to be like within the org, or if you're going to take it as part of your own community repo somewhere. And we have that kind of ready to go up front. And then some things of if it's new and it's in the SALT project org, or if it's brand new and it's outside, and some things that are sort of just optional. And that's something that is, we could put work around that and put that into some sort of like code jam, even if it's like, we're going to build a template, that says, here's what we think that you'll do as part of, these couple of projects, right? That it has README and this contributing guide, it has a license file and the code of conduct. And the one that I really want to give them is also the security. Yep. We could work on this templates individually too, as part of specific code jams. That seems like a good place to me. I could be wrong.
What's interesting is that there'll be a difference between community maintained and SALT maintained, where
Yep.
Things like our security MD and code of conduct, for example, would only be in SALT maintained ones.
But we could probably pare something down to say, here's an example and a template of some things you'd need to fill out.
Yeah, because
Kind of like
that's
a README. Mhm.
yeah, that's the goal I want to have, is a README RST that has
Yes.
the good. See, I've been trying to get stuff from this project called the Good Docs Project, where
Yes.
they can provide templates. But honestly, I've been part of it for months, and they're stuck in the cycle of, we need it to be perfect before we give it to people. And so because they're stuck in this kind of perfectionist mode, they have no, in my opinion, they're at the moment, and I haven't checked for a while, but they had no usable templates that I felt would be useful. So I'm thinking of just making our own baseline README templates that we could always expand. But all they've got to do is say some generic things. What are the prereqs? What is this meant to do?
Mhm.
And what are the for SALT extension, for example, here's the directions, or a link to the directions on how to import a SALT extension into SALT. Some generic things that always need to be filled out as a minimum. That if that was brought up, because that's the problem with ITEM right now, is we also have all these projects with, they only have the title of the project in the README, and they don't know where to go from there. And if it was laid out as a bunch of questions, they could fill out the minimum needed. But I guess we're getting at time here, huh? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to save this stuff, and I didn't really get to that. Yeah, I'm going to be generating all those issues.
We talked about that.
We did
talked
at
about,
open hour too, yeah.
yeah, and we also talked about your next one is Furo and ABUX. We talked
Yep.
about that.
We did. And
We
the
didn't
rest of
go in
this-
order, but that's okay.
Exactly. We got this stuff. We got a bunch of extra notes based on what we were just talking about. And I'm going to push this MR and or PR. I forget the platform I'm working on and what they want to call it. So
Sure, this request.
Yes. All right, everybody.
Show off show off my cool, oh, you can't see it. Oh, it's the,
Is it
supposed to be
the
the right
spruce
to docs.
swag?
All right, the
Oh,
docs, huh?
cool.
Nice.
Yay.
Nice.
Okay.
That's
I'm actually
awesome.
in Portland, so.
Oh, yeah. I love
So,
Portland.
yeah.
It's a great place.
Too bad I missed any of the physical meetings, but I'm sure it'll be just as fun too.
Yes,
Totally.
yes.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
And yeah,
We'll pick up where we left off in another 2 weeks, I guess. Is that
yep,
what
for
it
the
is?
working group. And I'll be Twitch streaming next week. It just might be more item docs focused stream for next week. So
Alrighty.
cool stuff.
Bye,
All right.
everybody.
Thanks,
Yeah,
everybody.
thank you.
Have a good one.
Bye, guys.